Over the past couple of weeks, I've learned to both love and absolutely hate this thing. I've spent more time with it than with my wife, and this is what it was all about. You've probably seen it in previous videos, and I've mentioned it once or twice. The gel coat of this boat and some of the outer shell is just in a very, very not good condition. So one of the larger projects that I've had on my mind from the beginning was fixing that. At a couple spots in this video you'll see this black ash on the hull. That's to make uneven spots show up clearer so you know where to sand more. So don't worry, that's intentional. The port side gel coat so far hasn't really been touched. It's in the same bad condition it is on the starboard side, but I've started to sand it. Sometimes it was pretty thin, so I actually got down to the fiberglass. Sometimes just getting a rough surface for epoxy primer afterwards. It will require a whole lot of primer. So what I've chosen is a standard, relatively cheap epoxy base filler, so that can be used both above and below water. The general idea here is to fill all the uneven surfaces with this epoxy base filler, then sand it back down, and then follow the whole thing with a couple coats of epoxy primer, which serves as a protection from osmosis, which is the worst nightmare of any fiberglass boat's owner. And then follow that up with a PU Topcoat. This means that I'm not going the classical gel coat restoration path that most refitters go by. The reason for that being that the gel coat is beyond repair in many spots. I also had to drill out all the holes that the holding screws for the windows, the old ones, sat in, because I'm still hoping to find somebody who will make some aluminum frames to just put into the window cutouts. The holes were sometimes cracked a little bit. They were pretty dirty. There was a lot of silicone in there because sometimes they were badly drilled, so you have basically two holes in one. So drilled them out, then scraped all the silicone or the sealant off. Then actually put some tape over it from the inside so that when you put in filler you don't just push it through. Had to poke a hole into the tape. That way the air can escape, but the filler won't get through. In my earlier trials, when I put in the filler, it just bubbled and you still had some air caught in there. So I got some, in this case actually polyester and fiber filler, because I still had that lying around. I switched halfway through to epoxy fiber filler. The most important part here being that there is some fiberglass fibers in there, because that way you don't run as much of a risk of the whole thing just falling out and ruining your paint afterwards. It did take a couple of tries to get an even surface so you don't see the holes after you've put on the primer. When removing the screws of a handle on the inside, I had somewhat of a bad omen. So there was some water running out of it, not terribly much, but it was a warning of what was to come, as you'll see later. I also had to get rid of the metal bars in the entryway so I could repair the fiberglass below. And here we are heading closer to disaster. I started putting some of the powder on the hull below the waterline, then found this great tool for sanding on the inside, so in the concave hull. Don't have a time lapse of that, unfortunately. Then started sanding the flat surfaces with the orbital grinder, and then I saw these drips. Some innocent looking little drips. I poked around a bit with my flathead screwdriver and then got some more innocent looking little drips. which didn't seem to stop, but rather get more. And the more I poked around with my flathead screwdriver, the more the drips turned into a constant stream. So I put a paint bucket below it, grabbed my camera so you guys can share this incredibly frustrating moment, and then waited and waited and waited until it would run out, which it did not. After a lot more poking around and my entire paint bucket being full of water, I ended up with about 2 liters, so half a gallon of water that was stuck in the hull somewhere below the buoyancy foam. The hull is compartmentalized, therefore I could not start painting it before removing the buoyancy foam and making sure that there isn't even more water in there that would be trapped otherwise below the paint. The day has come. I'm applying the first coat of paint. So tag along as I'll show you what I've done so far, how the boat looks right now, and then let's dive right into applying the first bit of epoxy primer. Let's go! As you can see, there is a ton of filler that has already been sanded down on here, but the surface is relatively smooth now. The next step after sanding everything down and spending weeks upon weeks doing that is using one of these dust cloths to get rid of everything else and then get started with some epoxy primer. So this is the cheapest one I could find from a renowned manufacturer here in Hamburg. I mixed that. There you have to be very careful with the ratios so that you don't get a bad chemical bond. Mix it, mix it, mix it, and mix it again so that it's properly done. And then started painting in a little bit of time during the day where the humidity was right, the temperature was okay, and after getting some more tips from the pros, like avoiding to put on too little of a primer because you can actually put quite a bit on it since it's a 2K product. And yeah, it worked relatively well. I had to apply 3 coats, so the boat in the meantime, I'm not sure, this I think was after coat 2, looked like this. Above the waterline I'm applying only 3 coats, below the waterline it's going to be 5 because the osmosis protection is really needed down there where the polyester fiberglass is actually below the waterline. If you're going down the epoxy primer route, then make sure to carefully read how much time you have to wait between the multiple coats you apply and how much time you are allowed to leave between the multiple coats you apply, because if you leave too little time then the previous coat isn't done yet. If you leave too much time you actually run into the problem that you need to sand again before applying the next coat. Sanding in between is a good idea nonetheless, so if you have the time or after a couple coats, just do it anyway. So after a couple coats, a bit of sanding for a change, and many hours of work, the primer was almost covering all the bad spots on the boat, was almost hiding all the filler, and I was ready to start applying the PU Topcoat. That one is an even more terrible chemical, so another special mask was required. Look into the safety precautions for that stuff, but PU isn't anything to mess with. On the other hand, it is absolutely amazing in terms of surface finishing and what you can do with it. Check out some videos. There's guys building brick walls, painting them with PU coat, then hammering away the brick walls, and the PU coat will just stand on itself. So it is amazing, but also smells like nothing good. Anyway, I got some help from my friend for smoothing out the parts I've already painted with a roll using a paintbrush, which is highly recommended because otherwise you will get cracks in the paint. And then after the coat was done, the boat looked like this, and I must say I am very pleased, especially now that I see the video of what the boat looked like before. It's only part of the boat that is painted so far, so as you'll see, the top deck is still left to do, and I've already talked about the part below the waterline, but that's it for now. So here we are, 3 coats of epoxy primer as well as 1 top coat of the PU. That's it for today. There is quite a lot of updates that I just haven't gotten around to making a video yet, but we'll get to eventually. Until then, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on it, and see you next time.